Happy Monday, everybody. It's time for another edition of Ask Mike. Courtney Mims alongside Mike Irwin here. And Mike, we're going to have some hot takes in the show today. You ready?
I'm ready.
Oh, well, you're always ready. Our first question is from JJ Jackson, who wants to know, why does the SEC office continue to ignore bad officiating in both football and basketball? I have friends who think they do this on purpose, helping some teams over others. I think they're just bad at their jobs.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I've talked about this many times on this show. At times you have a hard time convincing me there's not some sort of a bias there. Like, oh, this team's going to a bowl game, a good bowl game. This team's not going to a bowl game. We don't want to knock them down, so we're blah, 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 blah. I kind of think they don't do that because I think they'd get called out sooner or later. Somebody would whistle blow on that, and then it would make Greg Sankey look like a bozo, and he'd have to be fired. So I don't think they really do that.
Okay.
But I do believe sometimes they're really bad at their jobs, and I think there's a reason for that. I think they get overworked. These guys have other jobs. They get on an airplane. They have problems connecting and getting here and there, and they come in at the last minute, and they're tired, and maybe especially if they do more than one game in a short period of time. I ran into a guy at Baum Stadium a couple of weeks ago who was a referee, basketball referee, all the way back in the old Southwest Conference days.
Wow.
So he'd been retired for a while, but I had a really good time talking to him about some of the issues he had. And in those days, they drove to a lot of places so can you imagine being from Arkansas and having to go down to Houston and call a game, and then the next day you got to be in maybe Abilene at some other conference doing their game, and then on to Lubbock, and then back to Arkansas. And he said, yeah, it was really tough doing that, and it would affect you sometimes because you're tired. Look, the ultimate answer to this, and this is never going to happen, but I've talked about it before. You take some of that money you're spending on other things. You tell each school, look, if you want better officiating, we're going to take some of this TV money, and we're going to hire these officials full time. They will come in 5 days a week and work an 8 to 5 shift, and spend a lot of times in the off season reviewing their calls, and talking among themselves and doing that. And then in season, if you're not scheduled to do a game on that particular day, you come in and review calls that you've done earlier and where you went wrong, how you could have gotten it better, positioning, different things like that. I think there's no question they would get better if they were full-time employees, but it would cost money, and I don't think they're willing to do that. I don't think the coaches, I don't think any of these schools would go, okay, we'll give up some of our budget so we can have better efficient. So it's one of those things where people gripe about it, but the way to solve it is money, and I don't think they'll put money into it.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I used to know an NBA referee. He lived where I was growing up in Florida, lived right next door, and I always used to ask him, why are there just some really bad officials? And he goes, well, some just don't get better at it. You know, there are some really bad officials out there. And he goes, and we're also just human. You know, he goes, I have calls that I have missed in my career that still haunt me to this day, that I go, man, I missed that call and I feel really bad about it. There are. So, you know, that's from an official's mouth, I used to know, and we'll see if it ever gets better, but you're right. The solution is money, and I don't think they're going to be willing to pay to have it fixed. Dwayne says he was trying to dunk, his head knocked back to shoulder blades, and he's talking about that missed dunk by Mekhi Mitchell at the end of that Alabama game this weekend.
That's a really difficult thing to talk about because if you look at the TV angle, they never showed a replay of it up close. You can tell what happened. The guy goes up, tries to block a dunk by Mekhi Mitchell, misses the ball completely and comes down and just mashes his head backwards parallel to the ground. Now, you and I have discussed whether or not that could be a flagrant one. That's one of the ways they could have gone back and looked at it because you're inside 2 minutes. Musselman, I think, could have called, hey, I want that reviewed. Mekhi could have gone to the floor and then probably forced a review of it. The question is, would they have called it a flagrant one? Because if you review it, you can't go back and say, oh, yeah, we missed that. We'll call it now.
Right.
You miss a call, you miss it. So would it have been a flagrant one? Probably not. The bottom line is it's just hard for me to believe that 3 officials didn't see that.
Me too.
It was just such an obvious when your head goes all the way back from here to there.
He got mugged. I mean, we all saw it.
Yeah, it was just So it's just one of those things where it's like the Auburn football game for a few years, because the problem with that call was because it wasn't made, it decided the game. They were already up by 3. There was 33 seconds left. So if you call a foul there, if you make the 2, you're up by 5, and there's 30-something seconds left. Game probably doesn't go to overtime. So it probably decided the game. And that's what makes it difficult, but it's just one of those things where we'll sit around and talk about it and nobody can do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, even Musselman after the game made a point to say, you know, what are we going to do? Send it in to the office to say, oh yeah, we missed the call. I mean, that's going to do nothing. And at the end of the day, they haven't gotten those calls all year long.
That's true.
So it definitely decided the game, but even if they went back and reviewed it, I don't know if they'd call it a flagrant one. I don't even know if they would.
They probably wouldn't. The point I made is, and you don't ever know what's in a ref's head, but maybe they go back and they're reviewing it and they're standing over there and go, oh boy, we really missed that call. And they might not say it.
Yeah.
It might be in your head, but you're going to go, yeah, that's a flagrant one, when you don't really think it is, to do as a makeup call.
Yeah,
I don't know if they would do that or not.
Yeah, because it was so blatant and they missed it. They could have maybe done a makeup call. I guess that we could talk about it all day long, but Brian Burrow has a good point right here in his statement. Shouldn't have come down to a call or no call to win. We led the entire game, but must finding ways to blow lots of leads this year. Knew it would happen, just like at Kentucky.
I totally disagree with that take. That's a mad fan, and I'll just tell you, I didn't have issues with the way he coached that game. Get off of it, people. You may not like what has happened for most of the year, but in the last several games, he's finally figured out what's wrong with his team, and he's fixed it. And if they didn't have to go on the road and play Kentucky, if they didn't have to go on the road and play Alabama, if those 2 games had been played here, Arkansas would have won both of those games. They're a completely different team right now than they were. It's just too late to do anything about it. And I get it. And I'll tell this quick story, talking about it on the radio this morning. One of the reasons that I'm so interested in this team right now is it reminds me of something that I've talked about before, my senior year, where we had a bad football team. We'd been good the year before. We lost a bunch of really good seniors, and now I'm one of only 3 seniors the next year. And we had a bunch of sophomores and a few juniors, and we just kept working, and we weren't getting beat badly, but we just kept losing games. And it got to the point late in the year, past the halfway point, the men in that town gave up on us. They did. They just didn't care anymore. And you don't know how bad that hurt, because when you grow up in a small town and those men were good to you when you were a kid, they may be the parents of some of your friends, people you've known since you were 5 or 6 years old, and when they quit on you, it hurts, because you're there trying to represent your hometown, and those people are your hometown. And it crushed us when they did that. We talked about it. They've quit on us. They don't believe in us anymore. But we believed in ourselves, and we got our act together, and we kept working. We won our last 4 games, and the last 3, we just absolutely bulldozed the other team. We beat the last game, we beat the team 55-14, just ran over them. And it was our way of saying up to those people in the stands, hey, eat it. That's how we feel about you now. You gave up on us, but we didn't give up on ourselves. Look what we did. Look at the scoreboard. Accept that, because that's who we are right now. And no, none of us believed we had a great season. We won 4 games. You know, that's not great in a 10-game season, but we still did it. And we talk about today, sometimes that's what sports is all about. It's not winning a championship. It's facing a difficult situation and never giving up and keep fighting to the end, and you finally do what you wanted to do. Now, somebody pointed out that may not be what's going on with this team, and I freely acknowledge that. You may have a bunch of players that are going, oh no, if I don't play better, I won't get to transfer next year. I want some NIL money. I may not get NIL money if I don't play better. You may have Musselman going, I better coach my tail off because if I want another job. We don't know what's going on inside that team. And if it turns out that all of them just played better because they want a better deal next year, then I'll change my opinion of what I've seen. But right now, I choose to believe that these guys never gave up on themselves. They kept trying, and I don't care whether you, Joe Blow fan out there, have blown it off or not, or like this guy who's just going to sit around and be mad. They played a heck of a game, in a very difficult situation in which most of the time, Alabama, they're going to figure out a way to win.
Yeah.
Because stuff is just going to happen to you on the road like that. I've been watching basketball on the college level for 51 years. Give me a break. I'm sitting there talking to somebody while that game's going on, and Arkansas is not going to win this game. There's just the chances were like 10%.
Yeah.
Even though they led the whole way until right at the end and weren't behind until 30 seconds into overtime. I just never felt like it was going to happen. So I thought that what they did at Kentucky was remarkable, you know, and what they did against LSU here when they beat LSU. They've played 3 really good games back to back to back.
Yeah, I don't think if you had asked me earlier in the season, if you had said, hey, that game with Alabama at the end of the year, it's going to go to OT. It's going to be a really good battle, and Arkansas is never going to trail in regulation. I would have told you were crazy.
Yeah.
I would have told you were lying. So we can see the change in this team. We can see, and I choose to believe like you, it's because of the fight. That's what sports is about. That's what I choose to believe college sports is about. It's the fight and drive in those players. That's what I believe.
I believe if you're a fan, you're not on that team. You're not in that locker room.
No.
There are things you aren't around. So all you do is look and you want them to win. So when your favorite team doesn't win, it's real easy to let go and start thinking about another sport, or I'll worry about it next year. When you're on that team, you're stuck. Where are you going to go? Now, you can quit like the football team did, and they did. And if you haven't been around long enough to know that what I said about Pittman and that football team is very unusual. I let them have it because I couldn't believe the way they gave up on those home. They have people sitting in the stands that showed up to watch them, and they just quit. Yeah. And what I'm saying is I see a huge difference in what happened with football at the end of the year and what's going on with basketball right now. This is the way you should do it when you say to yourself, okay, nobody else believes in us, but we believe in ourselves, and we're gonna right up to the last game, we're gonna try to win.
Well, that kind of leads into our next question, or next statement, which is from Foosman, who says, I hope this is a Cinderella story of the century. And I think he's referring to this basketball team and maybe in the SEC tournament this week.
Yeah, if they were to win 5 games, which they're not going to do. But here's the thing. You got to have fans like that. You're going to have people making fun of them. They're going to say, they got whatever the term you have for somebody like that, drinking the Kool-Aid or whatever.
Drinking the Kool-Aid,
all the term. I've seen fans like that get made fun of for decades. But every school, every team needs fans like that. Maybe you don't expect all fans to be that way, but you got to have your loyal fans that are always going to be there with you. So this particular fan, I'm telling you, until the whistle blows on the end of that last game, whenever it is, and look, are you kidding me? They'd have to win 5 games, and it looks like the way that works out with the bracket, there's not a single one of them that they would play that they've beaten this year.
Nope.
So you're going to have to play 5 teams that has beaten you already.
Yeah.
So would that be unbelievable? Yes, it would. And I'm not saying it's totally impossible, but it's about 99% impossible.
Well, I like it. The funny thing is I like that Vanderbilt matchup that they have on Wednesday night because I do believe that they can beat the Commodores. I do believe that. And then you go into with a hot South Carolina team, right?
They almost beat before. They're mad at.
Yeah, they had it was a back and forth battle. I think South Carolina led in that game by 20 at one point. But again, it's a game that I feel like, okay, if you have enough drive, if you play like you did against Alabama and Kentucky, you have a chance of beating the Gamecocks. And then, you go up against Auburn. I mean, we all know what happened in that game.
Yeah, so they might win 3. It wouldn't shock me if they won 3. They're not winning 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Auburn's about as far as you get.
Auburn's about as far as you get. That's where we see the Cinderella story end on Mike Irwin's mind there. Eddie Lynn asks, are you worried about baseball? They're number 1 now, supposedly. That's the kiss of death. We know that to be true, right, Mike?
Well, the kiss of death thing, I think it was 3 years ago maybe that they were number 1 almost the entire season. And so you say that's the kiss of death. And yeah, they got into to their own super regional, and it was like what happened last year, in my opinion. The committee didn't do a good job of seeding that thing. Arkansas, for the number 1 seed in the whole tournament, you got North Carolina State, which in my opinion, if they hadn't had COVID that year, they'd have won the national championship. Wow. So how does that happen to an Arkansas team that's number one the entire season, is the number one seed in the entire NCAA baseball tournament, and they get a team like that? How did that happen? What do you just got people sitting up there? Oh, yeah, I don't know. Let's don't look at this. Let's just, okay, yeah. Here's
Yeah,
our
NC
bracket.
State, the hottest team in the country right now.
Let's go eat some dinner now. I don't know, but that was really bad. So I don't believe in the curse of being number one. I think it's something to be proud of right now. Here's the thing. They're not only pretty much a consensus number one in the country, they got the number one RPI and the number one strength of schedule.
Oh, yeah.
They've played good teams. That's why even with 2 losses, and there's several other teams up there with none, they're still number one, but it's because of who they've played. Mm-hmm. And then if you look at what happened this weekend, first of all, you're getting Peyton Stovall back. And what does he do? He has 5 hits and 5 RBI over the weekend. He's already batting .340 in his first weekend back. I remember his first few at bats, they were going, well, he needs some time. You can't expect him just to come back and rule. And he didn't need any time. He's hit the ground running. He hits a home run. So I like that. You've got Wahiva.
Wahiva.
You don't pronounce the W. Wahiva Aloy. He's starting to hit the ball. He's starting to come around. And people have complained, why is he still in the lineup? Because they know what he can do eventually. So he's coming around. Your center fielder, Wilmsmeyer, has been struggling at the plate. He has a couple of key hits over the weekend. And then when you look at their pitching, their 3 starters are 7-0 combined. Tiger his ERA has dropped below 1. Hagen Smith, who started off at one time with an ERA of around 5, his is down right just above 2. And Molina had a rough outing. This happens. I was watching that game on Sunday. Just didn't have his good stuff. He didn't have a lot. He throws it high anyway to get a lot of people to strike out swinging high. It was too high, and he was a little bit wild. And he was walking people, hit a guy at one point. But he got into several situations early, which could have been a disaster, and he would get out of it with strikeouts. He just didn't go very long. I'm not sure he went 4 innings.
Yeah.
And gave up 3 runs, so his ERA went up a little bit. But I think he's going to be fine. Every pitcher, sooner or later, in the course of a season, just goes out there one day and they don't have their stuff. The team batting average is up to 300. Remember when just a couple of weeks ago, when they came out of the tournament in Arlington, their team batting average was down to like 248. Now it's back up to 300. So it looks like all the stuff we talk about, give these guys time, the batting will come around, the pitching's still good. I don't know. They got another one of their pitchers back.
Yeah, you didn't even mention Dylan Carter coming back, finishing that game 3.
He closed that game out, and I mean, it could have gone the other way. So
that's what I said, yeah.
And then, they're beating good teams. It's not, you look at some of these teams like Tennessee and Texas A&M, and they're undefeated, and you're going, whoa, they're breathing down your neck. But they haven't played the schedule that Arkansas has played. So all of it, I just don't know what you have anything to complain about with baseball right now.
Yeah, Arkansas, and people always say that, like, who's McNeese State and who's UCA? But those teams are really good in the RPI. I looked at McNeese State. I was shocked to see them at 28 heading into the weekend. UCA was in the top, I believe it was the top 40 of RPI. Maybe they're higher than that now after playing Arkansas. These are teams that may be non-conference foes, but are great for that strength of schedule. That's why Arkansas has that #1 ranking right now.
Up until this weekend, James Madison, Arkansas was the only team that had beaten them. They finally lost one other game, so they've lost 4 instead of 3.
And they're high in the RPI too right now. I think they're top 15.
Yeah, exactly. So I just don't see there's really anything to complain about with baseball right now. Just enjoy it. Enjoy where they are. Enjoy being a consensus #1. Because it doesn't happen all that often.
Enjoy getting the respect, right? I mean, getting the respect is very nice. To football now. Mousetown asks, I told you we were going to get spicy, and I knew it was going to be Mousetown. What's up with the offensive linemen cracking jokes with the new QB after practice? With the season those guys had last year, they don't need to be laughing about anything. Plus, DJ Williams says one of them called Petrino Bobby. He called the guy out.
Yeah, I haven't talked to DJ about this. So you may have, I don't know, Alyssa may have talked to
Alyssa,
him.
I think, talked to him about it. But
Here's the thing that DJ doesn't seem, because he hasn't seen this. Petrino's a different guy right now. He just is. He's not coaching the way he did before. I was at a lot of those practices. The guy's smart. He knows what he wants. He knows how to run an offense. He knows how to call plays. But I thought he was over the top in the way he dealt with some of the players. I don't think you can coach that way anymore. I'm not going to get into some of the things I saw, but that's 15 years ago. Things have changed these days. I just don't think, I think there's a line you can't cross. And I think Petrino knows that. Now, I don't think that's the only reason why his attitude is different. I think he's a lot happier than he was. I think he's enjoying himself right now. And I think all of this works. Now, the whole deal with the team, the offensive linemen, they shouldn't be allowed to do this and this and that. First of all, there's a whole bunch of new guys on that offensive line. You're going to punish them for what happened last year? You're going to tell all these transfers, and they've got some impressive guys and maybe another one that they're about to add. You're going to say, well, yeah, we have to punish you because the guys were bad last year. I think it's a negative to start off assuming that this offensive line is last year's offensive line. You got to let them start clean. Now, if they start having more of the same problems, but by all accounts, and we've only seen 2 practices, but I've talked about what I see that's different from other spring practices, and specifically when I've seen a new coordinator come in, running a new offense, what you always see for the first 2 or 3, and this happened last year, by the way, is you see a lot of restarts. You start to run a play, blows a whistle, come back here, and somebody's doing something wrong and it's all messed up. How often does that happen in the first 2 days that we saw? I didn't see it happen one time. There were a few mistakes. Petrino got mad one time because the pass rush got to Taylor Green and he had to throw the ball away. And you could see he was a little bit upset, but he didn't yell at anybody. You could just see the expression on his face like, what's going on here? I like the pace of this thing. It's going quick. They're mostly, the top 2 quarterbacks are completing right at 70% of their passes. Receivers are getting open. The ball is delivered on target. I've seen a few bad passes that were caught anyway with great effort by the receivers. It's going to be hard to judge the offensive line until Saturday scrimmage. You want to see, and I hope they'll have some tackling, because you want to see the O-line against the D-line. You want to see how well they pass block. You want to see if there's good run blocking. And by the way, the running backs have been impressive too. So I like what I've seen so far, but I freely admit, until we get into a scrimmage situation, what do you really know?
Yeah, and I even responded to DJ's tweet because I was like, okay, I see where he's coming from. As a former player, I understand who played for Petrino, that he knows what he was like. But I agree to your point. He seems like he's changed a lot. I mean, there's no cussing. There's not really a few upset moments, but not really yelling. He's laughing. He's smiling. They're joking around.
DJ needs to come up here and talk to him.
I think so. DJ needs to come up here and talk to him. And the other thing I like that I want to point out about that video that was posted, I like the camaraderie that Taylor Green has with the offensive line, because what happened last year with KJ Jefferson, there was animosity between him and that offensive line. You could feel it. You could tell.
That's what a lot of fans don't get, because KJ Jefferson was like up here to them. He could do no wrong. And so they were like, it's their fault, not his fault. They're terrible. He's great. He deserves a better O-line than that. The truth is there was no connection there. And what Taylor Green is doing right now is saying, hey, guys, you're part of this. Come over here.
Step into the spotlight. Get in and talk to him. It was awesome. That, to me, I don't know if it'll pay off down the road, but right now I like to see that.
To me, what they're trying to do, that tells me that people always talk about Sam Pittman doesn't get it. Sam Pittman's old school. But he's not so old school that he doesn't understand that those offensive linemen need to feel like they're a part of what's going on, rather than a bunch of guys over there in the corner that everybody's mad at. Hey, go over there. You were bad last year. Stay bad until you get good.
That's no way to treat those guys. And Eric Mateos even posted a tweet today that was like,
he did.
He did. I love this tweet. Maybe I can pull it up in the editing process and show you guys what I'm talking about. But he said, he posted a picture of that 2015 offensive line. And he said, good offensive lines are fun off the field, have a lot of fun together, are a good group, but on the field they get it done.
Yeah,
and
so
that's always been true.
What he was saying is DJ's forgotten that he got to have a little bit of fun too. Maybe Petrino wasn't always around looking. And they still had a good time.
They still had some fun. So there you go. Hot Dogger says, I'm pretty stoked to see how in-helmet microphone helps our offense. But who will be in control of shutting it off before the ball is hiked? Will it be Bobby Petrino or some neutral official that will be responsible?
Part of the problem here is that it's not in place yet. It's going to be voted upon next month. So until they actually vote on it, we don't know for sure about any of this stuff. Common logic dictates that there'll be someone who's a part of what I call the game crew. The game crew would be a guy running the real clock, a guy running the game clock. You know, they're not officials out on the field, but they're part of the game crew. So just like somebody runs the game clock, and it might be the guy that runs the game clock, he will be in charge of shutting it off with 15 seconds left in the play clock. So the interesting part of this to me is that if it stays on until 15 seconds left, think about the potential here. Think about the potential for Bobby Petrino to be talking, if they snap early, if they have their act together and they snap around 15 seconds, Petrino's going to be able to talk to his quarterback all the way up until the ball is snapped. I don't know why with this rule you'd want to go down to 5, 4, 3. Sometimes it may happen, but you're much better off snapping early. First of all, it's more of a pace thing, which is generally good. And secondly, it allows your offensive coordinator to talk to his quarterback right before the snap.
Yeah.
So.
And confirm this for me, because we did have somebody in the YouTube comments ask about this. They said, is it just going to be one player who gets it? Or when Pittman talked about it this week, the way I read it, it sounded like one player is designated, but it kind of sounds like they get one player on offense and one player on defense, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The speculation is that the defensive player that gets it will be one of the linebackers.
Okay.
Because they're generally the people that call the plays on defense.
Okay, but that is kind of what Pittman was saying, right?
Yes.
Okay, so one player on offense, one player on defense. There you go for that YouTube commenter who wanted to know last week. Jayhog wants to know, after 2 practices, is there a big gap between Green and the other QBs?
I don't know that there's a big gap. I didn't notice he and Malachi Singleton as the 2 guys. I didn't notice that they were great and the others looked terrible. I just think based on what we're seeing that Green is going to be the starter. It's his job to lose. And then Singleton, I think what they're trying to do is develop Singleton into a guy that if something happens to Green, you don't automatically lose the game because your starter is out. That's been an issue for a long time with this program, and it's something you absolutely have to address. If you don't have a backup quarterback that can go in and help you win a game, you're doomed. You have to sit around biting your nails just hoping your starter doesn't go out. So I think that's the whole point. To go with those 2 right now doesn't mean you're not trying to develop anybody behind them. I understand the question. I don't know that my mind is set toward, is there a gap between the starter and the others? I hope there's not a gap between 1 and 2, a big gap. I think 2 needs to be almost as good as 1. I've talked about how they're totally different quarterbacks. Taylon Green is a tall Matt Jones type with probably a little bit better arm than Matt had. I always felt like Matt was underrated as a passer. But this guy can run, he's fast. Some of the D linemen have talked about how they've gotten out, especially the D ends, how they've gotten out to the corner and thought they had him cut off, and he went right by him. He's really quick. And anybody that remembers Matt Jones and how he could peel out and start down the sidelines and just blow right by people, this guy can do that. But he's also got a good arm. That's the thing I've been watching him do. I've been watching to see how accurate is this guy. And he doesn't complete every pass on target.
Yeah, you said about 70%,
but he's
right?
generally accurate. So I think you've got a good passer and a guy that's a speed runner. Then you got this backup quarterback. He's also a good passer, but he's shorter. They list him as 6'3", he's about 6'1" at the most. He's a lot shorter. He's going to have to roll out more to throw. But doesn't have the straight line speed of Taylon Green, but he's really, really good side to side and good quickness. A lot of fans don't understand what makes somebody gain yards in a football game. Damian Williams was a Springdale receiver back during the Mitch Mustang years, and people thought he was fast. He wasn't fast. He didn't even go to the state track meet his senior year. He didn't make it past the conference track meet. He was something like an 11.1 or 11.200 meter guys. That's not fast, but he could stop and start back up to full speed in one step and go left or right as quick as anybody I've ever seen. And that is football speed. That's why they say football speed. It's not always about, we had a backup quarterback here that was fast for 2 years. Remember him?
Oh yeah.
Everybody talked about how fast he was.
Yep.
He didn't have football speed.
Yeah.
He was just a straight line guy. Well, so Malachi Singleton's got football speed. I've watched him pretty closely. He's really good. He can peel around to the end and then go back in around the linebackers and just move in and out and out. And he's not going to go 60 on you. He's going to turn what would have been a 5-yard run into a 12-yard run, and that's important.
Yeah.
So he's your backup, I think.
And then you didn't even mention, but Jacoby Criswell's still there in that room, and then the freshman KJ Jackson.
He's really impressive looking.
I was very impressed. I know it's just a freshman, but you got to kind of keep him in mind there, as that they're going to develop him, I'm sure, and keep him as an option moving forward. Well, WV Hog fan asks, has there been any decisions made by the SEC how the 2025 football schedule will look like? Division alignments, permanent opponents, et cetera, et cetera.
There are no divisions. It'll all be one. Everybody's in one division. They have not released the schedule. There's speculation that there was some kind of talk that there would be a pod system. They're saying not a true pod system, but each team will have 3 permanent opponents. If you want to call that a pod, you can call it, but it's different. You're not all the same. In other words, Arkansas might have 3 permanent opponents, but each of those 3 wouldn't necessarily be, playing like it would be if it was a pod where they were all playing each other. So I think the pod idea is out, but I think based on what I've read, each team is going to have 3 permanent opponents, and then what that does is everybody else rotates to the point where the way it works out is you would play everybody in a 2-year period. That's a big emphasis they're placing to make sure that you don't go 3 and 4 years and not play a team. There are teams that Arkansas didn't play hardly ever.
Yeah. When's the last Vanderbilt?
Hadn't played Kentucky in a while. South Carolina. So with this system, you're going to play everybody at least every other year, and you're going to be not a pod, but a permanent. You're going to have 3 permanent opponents, and what I've looked at, and they may not be accurate on this, but they're suggesting that Arkansas's permanent opponents will be Texas. That's good.
Okay.
They need that.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, the fans want it. Missouri, nothing we can do about that. We're going to be stuck with Missouri forever.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the end of the world could come, and it's still going to be Missouri's your permanent opponent.
And the rivalry is still going to be alive. They're going to still push it on us.
And then the third one is supposedly LSU, which is good. I would personally like to trade Missouri for Ole Miss.
That's what I was going to say.
Because I think Ole Miss is a natural. I think the fans get fired up about Ole Miss. I don't think they get fired up about Missouri, and it has nothing to do with Missouri beat. They can beat you every year. They just don't have an interest in that. But it looks like it's going to be Missouri and Texas and LSU.
I like
as
that.
Your permanent.
You don't think Oklahoma?
I would like it, but I don't. I think no, because for one thing, that might not be good, having to play Texas and Oklahoma and LSU every year.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
No, it wouldn't be good. I was just saying for proximity reasons. Maybe Oklahoma.
I
that
think
was
you're
all.
just going to have to be content with playing OU every other year, which is not bad.
No, I don't think that's bad at all. I kind of like those 3. I just don't like Missouri.
And you don't have to play OU and Texas in the same season.
Right. Grandy Hogg says, I'm a Whitehall graduate from the 70s. I've read speculation about Coach Muss being interested in a Whitehall basketball player. My question concerns the only Razorback basketball player from Whitehall. It was before your time, Robert McKenzie. Not sure of that spelling. He played in the 60s. Would you share what you can find out about his career?
Okay, McKenzie is spelled with a Z, not an S. He lettered all 3 years he was here.
Okay.
And he was here 67, 68, and 69. For his career, he averaged almost 15 points a game and averaged about 6 boards, shot around 75% from the free throw line, so he's a good player.
Yeah.
His sophomore year, his first year to play, he averaged 15.5 points a game, had a really good year. His junior year, he dropped a little bit to about 13 and a half, but then got it back up around 15 his senior year, and that was the year Almer Lee came to play for Arkansas, and he was averaging about 17 points a game. So he was right up there close to him. One of the better players on the team. I think you could argue for those 3 years, he's probably the second or third best player on the team, depending on how you evaluate it. Now,
Wow.
Grant Hall, who I've known for about 50 years, and is the longest person in the media. He's been around longer than anybody because he started when he was still in college. It's working for the old Northwest Arkansas Times newspaper. He started when he was still in college in 1969. He predates me by 6 years. He's been around forever, and he moved here with his parents in '53, so he's been in Fayetteville forever. Grant was a student during the 3 years that McKenzie played, and he said he saw all of his home games.
That's awesome.
And he said sometime in that period, he can't remember when, he hit a game-winning shot. He was a left-handed shooter, hit a game-winning shot, and it was right about the time that the movie Cool Hand Luke came out. And so the students nicknamed him Cool Hand. That was his nickname.
I love that.
After hitting that shot. So, and up until now, he's still Whitehall's only Razorback. We'll see if that changes.
Wow, that is awesome. Thank you for asking that, Grandy Hogg. We got a little history lesson there today from Mike. Dr. Starks wants to know, how often does recruiting go on between public high schools? Is there anything that prohibits it? Do you have any stories you can share about the things you've seen or heard over the years?
First of all, if you were to actually recruit somebody, if you're a coach, let's say I'm a coach at school X, and there's a player over here at school Y, and I want him. If you actually recruited him, either directly or used one of your boosters to do that, that's against the rules. If you got caught, you'd be in trouble. It's violated all the time because unless that person says, yeah, he recruited me, which he's not going to likely do, you're not going to get caught doing that. There's two different ways you can transfer, and I will call them old way and new way. Old way you could transfer is, but you had to establish a residence, prove that you had a permanent residence in the school district of the school where you transferred. And what used to happen is you'd get an apartment. The parents would rent an apartment, which you probably didn't live in, which would probably have a phone number just in case somebody called, with an answering machine. And then you would get mail there, and you'd have to check your mail. So that's one way you could do it. Now, and what do they call this school choice thing?
It's the School Choice Act. It's called the School of Choice Act. So
that's been in place for a few years. Under that, you don't have to establish a permanent residence. You can just say, look, I don't like this school. I have a right to transfer to that school, and you can do that. Now, you're not prohibited from doing this, but if you transfer from one school in a school district to another, like let's say Springdale to Harbor, or Harbor to Springdale, or something like that, Rogers to Rogers Heritage, or Heritage to Rogers High. If you do that, you have to get the permission of the two principals involved. And it may be superintendent, one or the other, I can't remember, principal or superintendent. You'd have to get permission. Now, I was told by somebody familiar with this, that almost never happens. So you generally can't go you couldn't go from a Rogers to a Heritage
in the
or a
same
Heritage
district.
in the same district.
Yeah.
But it does happen. And if you go back far enough, where I first started seeing these transfers was kids would transfer to Shiloh because it's a private school.
Yeah.
They might not like some of the stuff that goes on at a public school and feel like there's more of a different environment or whatever. So Shiloh benefited from these transfer rules. Now, stories, come on. I mean, I don't know of any. I haven't covered high school football in 10, 12 years, so I don't hear of this stuff. I can give you a personal story from when I was growing up, and there was a school south of where I was from, and they had a lot of oil money. And so they revenue from oil money allowed them to hire more coaches. We had 6 high school coaches. They had 10. And the rumor always was that they took 4 of those coaches and they did nothing but go fan out. And in those days in Texas, you had to sit out a year if you moved. If you legitimately moved from this town to that town, you could not play football that first year. You had to sit out. So the rules were pretty strict. But what these guys would do, because it didn't apply to a junior high, somebody junior high to high school. So they would fan out all over the state, and scout these really good junior high players, especially the 8th graders. And if they saw somebody that they felt was a can't-miss player, they would come back and tell the head coach, and the head coach would talk to somebody, probably with an oil company, and the next thing you know, the kid's dad would get an offer. Hey, well, how much do you make now in that job at the hardware store where you work? Well, we'll triple your salary. And they would bring the kid in, and he'd transfer in, and because he was transferring 8th grade to 9th grade, he could do that. And plus, 9th graders generally didn't play anyway. I mean, he could, but they generally didn't. So that's the way this particular school used recruiting to get kind of around the rules. They still did it within the rules, but they used the whole junior high dodge, and they had money. And it was buying players. So you've heard me talk about how much I hate that idea, that you buy championships. Those guys beat us the whole time I was in high school, and I respected how good they were, but I did not respect the fact that they were buying players and buying championships. You know, that's just not the way to do it.
No, I mean, the example that we were talking about before the show, because when I covered high school sports in Florida, Xavier Story Jr., who is now on the Razorbacks roster, he was at Graceville High School in the Panhandle. Graceville High School, for anyone that doesn't know Florida geography or high schools, is a tiny, tiny school. Tiny school. Was not very good at football. Was not very good at basketball, but he played there. He was, their star, their stud. And so when he got noticed by other schools, and he transferred to the school that all the great athletes go to, IMG Academy. So that is immediately when I saw this question, I was thinking, I know an example of that happened with Xavier Story Jr. But who knows what went on behind the scenes? I'm not saying he chose to do that on his own, or was he asked to go? I don't know. But I do know that it does happen, like you said, where kids are, hey, come over here, hang out with us, and nobody can ever prove it because you have to have someone tell on them.
Right.
S. Giles wants to know, who's that bad guy in the South Carolina LSU women's basketball dust-up? Looks to me LSU started it and acted like jerks afterward. I'm not a fan of either coach, but I felt like Dawn Staley handled it better than Mulkey.
Let's set this up a little bit because it's the championship game of the women's SEC tournament. South Carolina's ahead, 7 or 8 points, 2 or 3 minutes to go. They're going to win the game. LSU guard is bringing LSU guard has the ball coming down the floor. South Carolina guard takes it away from her and has what would have been a breakaway layup, except that the LSU guard grabs her and holds on to her. And at that point, if it stayed like that, it would simply be an intentional foul. But she kind of held on to her and swung her around, and then they kind of looked at each other, and then she bumped her too. Well, then there was some bumping going on, and when the bumping started, this big 6'8" South Carolina center goes over and shoves her down.
Yeah.
At that point, to me, she goes. I don't care if you're defending your teammate or whatever. There's no excuse for that. So she shoves her down. Then the brother of the LSU guard that was involved jumps out onto the floor. He doesn't do anything. It's like he jumped out there to defend his sister and then looked around and go, what am I going to do, hit one of these girls?
Yeah, you just got to be out there now.
I can't do this. And so he got arrested or carried off. They took him away in handcuffs. And there was reviewed the fool out of this thing, kicked a bunch of players out of the game for leaving the bench, but then ended up saying at the end that the only players that were actually suspended to the point where they would have to miss the first game of the NCAA tournament this week were the people actively involved in the argument. Okay, so all that's fine. Here's where the difference was. Dawn Staley is interviewed first on TV and then later in a press conference, and she said, hey, we shouldn't have done that. I apologize on behalf of my players. They know better than that. I'm going to talk to them again. We talk to them about this all the time. We're going to reinforce once again. No matter what happens in a game, no matter how mad you get, don't do this. And that's all she did. She didn't make excuses.
And the question wasn't even asked about that incident. She started both of her interviews with apologizing for it.
Mulkey came across like a player that was mad. She first started talking about the fact that this 6'8" center pushed one of her guards. And she said, that's not fair. That's not fair for somebody that big to be pushing around somebody. Let's let her go up against
She said, I wish Angel Reese would have come for Angel Reese.
Yes. In other words, she seemed to be encouraging that they should have fought. Angel Reese should have gone over there and fought her. And then she made some other stupid statement about the referees had something to do. It was like partially their fault. And then she said, if two girls get into that, just let them settle it on their own. So what, you gonna let them duke it out at half court? Just those two girls? Let's all stand here and watch them push each other around? So the whole answer was completely inappropriate. And I don't know if anything is gonna come of it. I know if I'm the AD at LSU, and I'm pretty sure that nothing will happen, but if I'm the AD, I call her into my office today and I say, hey, you look like a bozo compared to Dawn Staley. Dawn Staley. You look like a bozo because she said the right stuff. You said all the wrong stuff. Now, I want you to have another press conference and let's do this better. Let's accept our responsibility because you accepted no responsibility for anything while the other coach accepted total responsibility. You came across like a kid.
There was a classy thing to do in that situation. The classy thing was Dawn Staley. The unclassy thing was Kim Mulkey. I mean, I'm going to say it plainly.
She came across really bad.
That was not good. I definitely agree with you there, Mike. And our final question of the show is from Marty Bird's Proxy, who says, I enjoy stories about Coach Broyles and was curious about his relationships with his coaches as AD. Was there one coach who he seemed to really like? Sort of a class favorite, if you will.
I don't recall Frank Broyles ever having a favorite. I think he looked at his coaches as employees that worked for him, and his only obligation was to make sure they were doing what they were getting paid to do. And therefore, if they did what they were getting paid to do, which was coach their players and win, he was fine with them, but I don't think he went overboard. For one thing, he was such a cheapskate. I don't think he wanted to give them raises, even though he had to from time to time. And the other thing was, he just felt like, hey, we're all employees. What's important around here are the fans. So your obligation as a coach is to win for the fans. And my obligation is to make sure that you do win for the fans. And if you don't, I'll fire you. And if you do, I'll be fine with you. But don't expect me to treat you like royalty. Norm DeBryan, and I won't get into the whole thing, but one day he was trying to make the point that if Frank did have a favorite, it was probably John McDonnell. Because McDonnell won 40 national championships and so many conference championships, you couldn't keep up with it. And he was basically saying he was probably his favorite because what did he ever do wrong? And John just immediately stepped in and said, are you kidding me? He said, he didn't treat me any different than he did you or anybody else. As long as I was winning, he was fine with it. But he said, so he might have chewed you out if you didn't win every year. And I didn't get chewed out because I did win every year. But he never came to me and said, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so great. John talked about every raise he got, he had to go in and pretty much demand it. I mean, Oregon, which is kind of has more track, is considered the college track mecca of the country, and they've got a great stadium and all that. Oregon tried several times to hire John because their attitude was, hey, we're the #1 track program in the country, but Arkansas is really #1 because they're beating us every year.
Yeah.
So let's get their coach and we can go back to being #1, which is what we were before he started doing this. And John would appear from time to time go into Frank and say, hey, come on, they offered me another raise. I got to tell my wife something. You can't just keep not giving me a raise. And he would say that Frank would just look at me, all right, you got your dang raise. Now go out and win some more. And he'd be real gripey about it. That's just Frank. He just did not treat coaches like they were special because to him, they were there to do a job, you know? And if they did the job, okay, great. I'm not going to treat you like royalty because I don't want to have to pay you a lot of money. I don't want you coming to me and going, well, you've been so nice to me. I thought I deserved a raise. No, we're paying you. We're overpaying you already. We're already paying you to win, and you're winning, so you just keep making what you're making now.
Sounds like a good AD right there.
Well, he really, because where's the money come from?
Exactly.
It comes from the fans.
Exactly.
He wanted to be good with their money.
I like it. That's going to do it for this week's Ask Mike. We'll see you next Monday to answer more of your questions.